Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel Programming with a Purpose. I am bringing another exciting series which is a beginner level Swift learning series for the people who basically want to learn the basic concepts of Swift from scratch, or if you have already worked in Swift but you want to revise concepts for a job interview or otherwise, you can use this series. So we will learn about the general syntax and all of the important and basic concepts of Swift in this series. The links that I will use to create these videos will be pasted inside the description box. So let's get started. So Swift and ObjectiveC are the two languages that are used to develop apps from macOS, iOS, tvOS, watchOS, and now Vision OS. But ObjectiveC is the older version and quite closer to basically the C language, and Swift is the modern version that can help us to develop apps using all of the modern concepts and technologies. So we are going to learn Swift in this series. Swift has two flavors. One is basically the use of UI kit, which is storyboarding file and zip files to create the UI. And another one is Swift UI that basically uses only code to create the UI plus the functionality that can be used to make that UI work. Now the next question is why Swift differs from Objective-C, or how it differs. So basically it supports constants which are more powerful than normal C code. It supports tuples which can group multiple type of values to pass around or return from functions. Swift supports optionals, which means a variable can contain a nil value without giving a crash or an error. Swift is type safe, which means you cannot pass value of a variable for which type is not supported, like passing int value to a string variable. So let's start learning Swift using code. So first we are going to launch the Xcode and we are going to create a playground file that will basically help us to play around with the different Swift syntax. So you can see that it will give us the basic import statement of UI kit along with a variable greetings. So here you can see that once I play the code, hello playground is printed. After that you can see that I have created a constant which is basically let value is equals to 10. So now I am going to change the value of the variable of greeting to hello programming with a purpose, and I'll be able to successfully change it because it's a variable. Variable allows you to change the content of that memory location variable is pointing to. But once we try to change the value of the constant, it is going to give us an error because constant is a memory location that is read only. You cannot write to that location. So this is basically the concept of variable versus constant inside Swift. So here I'm showing you how you can comment, make the multi-line and single line comments for basically commenting out the code or adding certain comments to the part of the code. So here I'll be putting a comment on each of the sections, so we will be able to understand which concepts we are going to learn from the below mentioned lines of code. So the next one is basically type annotation. So let's see what type annotations are and how our Swift syntax is going to help us to annotate certain types. So here you have seen that we have created a variable with the name and the content is programming with a purpose string, and another variable is basically I've again created the same variable with the same name, and it is going to give me an error because we cannot declare two variables with the same name. Now I have changed it to channel name and mentioned the type annotation as string. String is a data type inside Swift like other languages. So you can see that the error is gone, but I have not mentioned the content of string on line number 13. But in line number 12, I haven't mentioned the type annotation, but I have mentioned the actual string. So the compiler will understand that it's a type of string we are going to put inside the type of the variable with name. So this is called basically type inference, in which the compiler tries to understand what type of data will be accommodated in a variable for which type annotation is not mentioned. So if I try to create a variable without any content and without any annotation, it is going to give us an error because type annotation is missing. So we cannot do this. So next we are going to basically explore the type tuples that we have mentioned. It is a power of Swift. So here we are going to create a constant with the name of HTTP error, and we are going to pass it two values. So it will contain an int, which is 404, and a string not found. So in this way we can basically give an error code as well as the actual error to our constant HTTP error. Now we are creating another constant with the name of HTTP 200 error, and here I am going to mention the name of the actual variables that I am going to add. So basically there is a status code 200 and description OK. Now how we are going to access the values of each of these components of a tuple, I am going to show you here. We can print the output of any of the variable using the statement of print and using double quotes. So the status code is, we are going to escape the string using a backward slash and double rounded brackets. And here we can put our variable name that we want to print here. So we are going to print HTTP 200 error dot status code. So in this way we can access the values of the individual components of a tuple. So here you can see that the HTTP 200 error dot status code 200 is printed on the screen, on the below mentioned screen and also on the right hand screen. And now we can print here the description as well. So you can copy paste this line and make HTTP 200 error dot status code to description, and it is going to print the description of the constant HTTP 200 error. So this is the way to access the both of the components of a tuple. Another method to access the values is basically print the 0th component or the 1 component by using the dot identifier. So basically you can write HTTP error dot 0 to print 404 and dot 1 to print the description, which is basically not found, and you can see that both of the statements will be printed on the bottom of the screen. Now the most powerful thing inside Swift is basically the use of optionals. So here a variable can contain a value as well as nil at the same time. So you can see that we are creating a variable with the name of server response code, which is of type int, and a question mark shows that it is an optional. So we are going to put nil in it. Suppose when we want to initialize the code, we can put nil in it, and after retrieving the code by processing a request, we can add that code inside this variable. So this is how optionals are basically declared. Now once we have an optional variable, we can manipulate it in 4 different ways how we are going to handle the nil value. So the first step is basically, or the first way is basically, skip the code that operates on the nil value. So how it's done, I'm going to show you here. So by using the if else statement, you can basically check that if the server response code is nil or not nil. If it's nil, we can basically print that no response code is found. Otherwise we can simply print the server response code. We can predict that it is going to print the else of the print statement, no response code is returned, because we have reinitialized server response code with the value of nil on line number 24. What we have done to basically handle the optional in this way is basically called optional binding, where we can bind it with our own specific type of variable to get the value if it's not null. So this is basically the optional binding. And another way is basically to use the double question mark and use the default value in case of a nil. And what it's called, let me show you here. In technical term, it is called Nil-Coalescing, which means that if the value is not nil, we are going to get the value of the default, which is after double question mark. But in normal language, we can say that we are providing a fallback value to our variable that can be nil. We can also do the program stopping execution at a certain point, because if the value need not to be nil in any case, then we need to stop the execution or record a certain error inside our error log. So this is called force unwrapping using exclamation mark. And here an error will occur and the program will not execute after this point if we are going to find the nil value, which is obviously in our case here. So this is the actual case of using force unwrapping. Is basically the good way of doing it is basically put it inside a variable, which is code, the server response code, and otherwise print fatal error. It is also going to stop the execution, but it is a nice way of doing the force unwrapping of a variable. and we are only going to use it either we basically do not want to proceed with the execution of the code, which is not quite likely in most of the cases, but where we are sure that the value will not be nil under any circumstances, we can unwrap it basically using exclamation mark. Another option is basically propagate the value in case of a class object. What we can do is basically if a certain object exists, then we are going to get its further parameter or variable. So in that case, I am going to use the example that is provided online in the link mentioned in the description box. So we are going to create two classes. One is a class person and another one is residence, and I am going to show you how we can basically do this by using question mark dot. In that case, if it contained the object, it is going to get the basically the variable from that object. Otherwise, if it's nil, it is not going to process the request. And we are going to use if and else to basically check if the value exists or not. So this example shows that if the person John has a residence and if it has number of rooms, obviously if it is going to have a residence, then there will be number of rooms. So if he has, we are going to print the number of rooms. Otherwise, we are going to get the message unable to retrieve the number of rooms. So this is how we can do basically appending the variable in the case of a nil value. Here I am showing you how can you write basically the do, try, catch statements. So what you can do is you are going to do the function call inside the do and parenthesis and try. In try, you are going to call that function. I am writing here a dummy function. I haven't covered functions for now, but just to show you a basic syntax of how a function can be written, here it is. We are going to write a keyword func, after that the name of the function, and in the round brackets we are going to pass the parameters, and this pointer is basically points to the type that is being returned. So we are going to return 2 plus 2 inside the function add. So I'm going to call this function inside my do block, and then there is a catch block. Catch block will basically correspond to the do block. Here there is an error that I have misplaced the parenthesis, so it is going to give me an error and I am going to fix it. This is how do, try and catch block will work in our case for Swift. Now you can see that I have commented out some of the lines that are basically stopping the execution so that we can move ahead in our playground file. So here I am showing you some of the basic operators. If you are familiar with any other programming language, you will be able to understand what these operators and these lines of code means, because they are pretty straightforward. So the first is operators. Here there is a constant which has a value, which is basically let b is equals to 10 and a variable a is equals to 2. So I am assigning the value of b to the variable. I cannot do this the other way around because b is a constant and a is a variable. So this is basically our assignment operator. The next I am going to show you here some of the comparison operators. Suppose 1 is equals to 1 is equals to, it should be true. 2 is not equal to 1. 2 is greater than 1. 1 is less than 2. All of these statements are true in our case. So this is how the comparison operators can be used. Less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. And you can place the values of the variables around the left and right hand side, and we have to give a space where not equal to is used because it can confuse it with an optional, since optional also uses exclamation mark on unwrapping. So the next operator is the remainder operator. Remainder operator is going to basically divide a top value from the basically the numerator with the denominator, and there is a percentage sign in between. So whatever is left is basically the remainder. So in case of 5 mod 2, 1 is returned, which is the remainder. After that, arithmetic operations, which are pretty straightforward: the addition, the subtraction, the multiplication and the division using this slash. So this is how basically we can do the basic arithmetic operations in Swift. So now I'm going to show you here basically how compound assignment works. So it basically is going to combine two of the operators. So we are going to basically use the addition operator as well as the assignment operator for a. So it means that a is going to return us the value of 2 in our case. So you are going to play the code, and here you can see on the right hand side 2 value is shown inside a. but a is already declared before, so we have to basically change the variable name. So I've changed it to a1. So you can also use any of the Unicode characters and numbers inside a variable name as well, but it should start with a alphabet. So here I'm showing you the Nil-Coalescing operator, which I've already shown you that it is a double question mark, which shows us the default value in case of our variable contains nil. So here 0 will be printed since server response code is nil when we have basically reassigned it. You can also see that it is a shorthand form of a server response code is not equal to nil, and we are going to basically use the first option if it is not equal to nil, which is the value of server response code, which is force unwrapped using exclamation mark. Otherwise it is going to give us the default value of 0 in case of an else. So this is a basically shorthand form of the Nil-Coalescing operator in Swift. Now the next very interesting operator is basically a close range operator, which will contain the starting value and the ending value inside the print statement. So this is how you have to include the start value and end value. You are going to just place 3 dots inside the your starting range and the ending range. If you do not want to include 1 or 5, you can use the greater than and smaller than operators to basically avoid the ending value or the starting value. These will be called half closed range operators or half open range operators. So here there are the basic logical operators, which is basically not, and or. This is how they will be written inside Swift. I haven't mentioned here any of the example, but you can use numeric values or the variable values to check how double ampersand corresponds to and, double straight lines correspond to or, and an exclamation mark before a variable means it is a not operation. After a variable, it can correspond to basically not equal to, or it can correspond to the force unwrapping of a basically nil variable. The next basically operator is basically one-sided ranges. So we have created an array with the name of variable name. So here we haven't mentioned any type annotation, but it will automatically understand it will be an array of strings. So we have created some of the values like Jack, Jill, George, Ali, and Mustafa. So for names in the ranges of 2 onwards, we are going to basically print George, Ali, and Mustafa, because if we start indexing from 0, 1, and 2, so 2 falls for George. In the same way, you can also print the values from basically using an starting value to a certain index, which can be 2. So it will include Jack, Jill, and George in our case on line number 131. So here the part 1 of the beginner series is complete. In part 2, I am going to discuss basically the looping and basically the collection types, which is arrays, sets, and dictionaries, along with strings and literals. So stay tuned for part number 2. Do not forget to like and share this video and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.